All right, so we're in part 3 of a 5-part series using material from Sean Nyquist called Present Over Perfect. Just a reminder to this group tonight, Sunday is our special contribution for Hope for Haiti's Children. We're hoping to give $4,000 or more. So 4,000 divided by 16 or so. But great opportunity to give to an organization who is desperately needed right now. Also opportunities to sponsor a child, and opportunities to begin filling joy boxes. So lots of really good opportunities there. All that is in Embrace. The details are. All right, so tonight we're talking about yes and no. Things that we say yes to, things that we say no to, and finding a balance between the two, okay? So sometimes yes is a very healthy thing to say and something that we really love to say. On a menu, what do you always say yes to almost? On a calendar, what would you almost always say yes to? Who is a person that you'll almost always say yes to? Or what's an opportunity that you will usually say yes to? There are no wrong answers.
I must always say yes to invitations to dinner and fun things. Like Bill and Lois have invited us to go on this cruise in New York City. That it's like an architectural tour, but you're on a boat and you're in the harbor there, and that sounds so fun.
Oh boy.
So we were like, yes. And we probably almost always say yes to our kids.
Yeah.
Well, almost always. They're grown now, so they don't have.
There's much to say no to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, I always say yes to my kids, and they're grown, and I still have to say yes. Not as much, but I always say yes to my grandchildren for sure.
Oh, I bet.
I usually always say yes to Debbie also.
And I do appreciate that.
I have to say, in general, I almost always say yes to almost everything unless I can't.
Yeah, me too.
Unless it's impossible. Now, sometimes that's more begrudging than other times. If I can, see that I really have no conflict and someone has asked me to do something, I feel the need to say yes.
Mhm.
Right.
So you kind of have a bias toward yes. You'd like to
Yes.
say yes if you possibly can. Yeah. What else? What are some things you really enjoy saying yes to?
I like to say yes to salmon on a menu. Everybody in my family knows,
Yeah.
because they all eat steak. So
You don't mind saying no to steak
I don't mind saying no to steak.
and yes to the fish.
Yes to the fish. Almost always yes to the fish. And I usually will not say, and I usually say yes to opportunity to travel.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mhm.
And Mike is probably the only one I'll always say yes to. Right. He goes, right.
Actually, the other way around.
Mike, you're the one that says yes more often?
To me.
Yeah.
It's what I'm saying.
Ask him now.
I almost always say yes to when a kid invites you to play with them.
Oh, yeah. Mhm, mhm. Well, in some ways, this part of us that enjoys saying yes, we might see it as a reflection of God, who says yes to us. This text in 2 Corinthians 1 verse 20, the Message translation, whatever God has promised gets stamped with the yes of Jesus. Whatever God has promised gets stamped with the yes of Jesus. So even when the world, or even when we're the ones saying it, say no, God in Jesus tells us yes. That's a fundamental part of his character, is when it comes to the things that truly matter, he says yes to us in Christ Jesus. So in some ways, we could look at our desire to say yes, our joy in saying yes, as a reflection of that. When you think of God and you think of this text here, God's yes in Jesus, what would be some of the ways in which you feel like God has said yes to you?
Hey, I might say that you are okay the way you are.
God is saying this to you. You're okay the way that you are.
You're valued and loved.
Mhm.
Seems to me God has, blessed me with certain gifts, and then he gives me opportunities to use them. So the desire of your heart ends up, it's easy then for God to say yes to, because he put that desire in you.
Yeah. Our desire to say yes aligns with gifts, passions that God has placed in our hearts and our lives. Yeah. Okay, as we did last week, we're going to watch sort of snippets of this video tonight. And so in this introductory piece, Sean Nyquist is going to talk about saying yes, and then just barely introduce some of the costs of saying yes.
I love the word yes. Like I'm kind of like that's like one of those things that's like it's so me. It's so who I am. It's so how I am. I love stripes. I love life on the water. I love flip-flops. I love cheese of any kind, especially, I know this is controversial, I love any kind of fake cheese product. Like if you can get it at a baseball game and it's like in a silver thing that they keep warm for like years, that's totally my jam. I love ponytails and hooded sweatshirts. I love playing on the beach with my kids. I love to read. I am the biggest bookworm ever. And so there are all these things that just bubble up in me. I love the smell of lavender. I love really dry champagne. I love to cook. I especially love to cook in the kitchen with my friends. I love that sound where your fingers squeak on an acoustic guitar. Well, not my fingers, because I can only play 2 songs, and they're the same. It's Wild Thing and Amazing Grace. It's just the same. You just sing the words at a different spot. But I love that tiny little squeak, right, of your fingers on a guitar. I love green apples. I love blueberries. I love picking cherries early in the season. And I love the word yes. To me, yes says possibility, adventure, yes to challenge, yes to showing up, yes to diving in. I love swimming with my clothes on, yes to swimming with your clothes on. I love what it says about life and energy and possibility. I had this amazing experience a couple years ago. I was invited to go on this trip, and it was with a lot of people that I didn't know, but I went anyway. And a friend of mine who had been on the same trip the year before, I was sitting at O'Hare ready to fly out to this like total unknown. And I texted my friend and I was like, what am I getting myself into? He's like, I'm not telling you anything, but jump, say yes, hog the coconut shrimp. And that did not help me at all. I had no idea what any of that meant. Then I got there and I made a couple friends right away. And I said, I have no idea what's about to happen to us, but this is what I know. Jump, say yes, hog the coconut shrimp. And so one of the first things we did, we were jumping off cliffs. Well, we weren't, the boys were. So it was kind of one of those things where like the boys were jumping off cliffs and I couldn't kind of tell, like, are the girls gonna do it too? Do I wanna be like the only girl? I don't know. And so I was just pulling back a little bit. And one of the first friends that I had made yells back at me, Shauna, I thought we said yes. Don't we say yes? And there I went off the cliff because we say yes. And that became kind of a code word for the way we wanted to live, wholehearted and brave and jumping in and showing up. And so it sort of took on a life of its own. After that trip, we would text each other all across the country. Are you saying yes? What have you said yes to recently? What are you showing up to? So I have a sweatshirt that says, say yes. I have a yes tote bag. I have yes earrings. I have a yes tattoo. I'm like big into yes. But I found at a certain point that essentially I had said so many yeses that I couldn't possibly live them all. I had crowded those yeses so many, one after another, after another, after another, that what was actually happening is I was having to say no to some of the most important things in my life. I had sort of willy-nilly, indiscriminately said yes, 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 yes. And inadvertently, in doing that, what I realized is I was saying no to my own spiritual practices, to my health, to my soul, to my closest relationships. And so what I realized is that essentially I needed to rework that rhythm of yes and no.
Okay, so there is a part of us that really loves to say yes, and there are many really good things to say yes to. And sometimes yes can be unhealthy and it can carry a certain cost to it. Damon Zaharides has a pretty popular book called The Art of Saying No. And he writes this: remember, there's only so much time in the day. You can't do everything. That means each time you say yes to something, you tacitly say no to something else. In pursuing some opportunities, you miss out on others. So can you think of some experiences, some people, some opportunities that you feel like you say yes too quickly to? You say yes to someone or something without really thinking it through.
Don't have a dog.
It was a dog, I muted.
I can't think of anything specific, but a phrase that we often have said to ourselves is like, if we approach an event, maybe we've said yes to, we go like, oh, it seemed like a good idea 3 months
At
ago.
the time, yeah.
We thought to do this, but it doesn't feel so good now.
Yeah.
Usually those are social events or, just events really that we
Mhm.
had thought would sound like a good idea at the time, but not so
Mhm.
good now.
Mhm. I'd say there have been times, significant periods of time in my own ministry when I was just too eager to say yes to anything. I mean, a mission trip, a speaking opportunity, an event. It was just default to say yes to it rather than think about it, think through it.
I think it, can become problematic if you're not, consulting your significant other or, you're saying yes to something that either brings them into something that they're not ready to do, or you say yes to something that will exclude them in some way from your being there for them. And so I think there's a lot of need for consultation for sure.
Yeah, so our yes not only affects us, it affects the people that are closest to us, right? Yeah. Okay, let's watch another little snippet here.
I think
As I began to look closer, kind of take a closer look at these yeses, why was I saying them? What were they? And at what cost? It seemed to me that as I became more and more honest with myself, there were sort of three categories. The first one was I was saying too many yeses in my work life because I was so invested in them thinking I was a star performer. I wanted to be the most responsible, the highest capacity. I didn't want to let anyone down. I wanted to be like everyone's favorite pupil. I wanted a gold star for doing it all right. And so if yes to one deadline is good, then yes to 2 deadlines is better. Yes, I can get it done a week faster. Yes, I can do 3 or 4 more. If I can speak at one event, I can speak at 2 or 3 events. I wanted to be seen as able, as capable, as someone who would never let the team down. And so I kept saying yes and yes and yes in my work life. And then in my kind of relational world, I became the person that picked up the pieces for all sorts of people, that kind of overfunctioned in my role as friend, as daughter, as sister, as wife, as mother. I was the one that hosted every party. I was the one that picked up someone's kids and this and that. And I instead of saying some very healthy, no, I can't do that for you, or no, my family comes first, or no, I'm limited or tired in whatever, I just said yes. At the expense of my own health, the expense of my own family, the expense of my most central relationships. And then the third thing is I said yes too often to kind of my own ravenous appetites. I stayed up way too late reading and watching movies. I traveled too much. I ate too much. I bought too much. I went too many places. I just kind of slipped into this sort of gluttonous way of like more, more, more. The world is so beautiful. I think it came out of like a lovely lust for life, but it turned into just sort of a ravenous more, more, more. And that more, more, more left me exhausted and depleted.
Okay, so in many ways, saying yes is a great spiritual practice, but saying no is also a pretty vital spiritual practice. So let's just look briefly at some of the times in the ministry of Jesus when Jesus himself said no. I thought really there were only 1 or 2 of these, but the more you sort of root around in the Gospels, the more you find examples of Jesus himself saying no. So we've got this instance in Mark chapter 1, where essentially Jesus is saying no to a group of sick people. When it was evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages that I may preach there also. For this purpose I have come." So we've got this lengthy line of people who are sick or demon possessed. Jesus does attend to many of them. But then the next morning he's out away from that line of people, and Simon's looking for him, and Jesus says, "Well, we need to go to another village." Why did Jesus say no here?
It sounds like he was getting kind of bogged down in healing when his main goal was to preach. He had a message that wasn't just about healing.
Yeah, so who he was and what he was about was more than just meeting those physical needs for those people.
I think psychologically, when people come into therapy, a lot of times, they want to have their problem solved immediately. And this reminds me of that Jesus, even if he healed everybody that night, it would still be there.
There are deeper issues that have to be addressed. Okay. Another example, this one from Luke chapter 12. "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." But Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Why does Jesus say no to this person who asks him to get involved in this family dispute over inheritance?
It seems like he doesn't really agree with the guy's premise. In some ways, he's, when he says, tell him to share this inheritance, I think he's saying, I don't agree with that. It's what the story seems to be saying afterwards. Man's possessions, don't consist in, his life doesn't consist in the abundance of his possessions.
Okay, so what the man is asking is contrary to a certain value that Jesus has, especially as it relates to possessions, and so he can't, it's not something he can say yes to.
What's remarkable about the story is the brother has to be the one who has the lesser inheritance, and you would expect, especially with our notions of equity and this is a sense of fairness, that this would be a case where he would say yes, but he's saying even the person who has less, who desires more, in this sense, is missing what's important about life. And no, I'm not going to read. You're being greedy too. Poor people can be greedy. The person with less can be as greedy as the person with more. We tend to think it goes the other way, and historically, I've kind of put my money on that too. But it's possible to have little, enough, but be as greedy as anyone else.
That's good, very insightful. Another example, Matthew 20, Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? And they said to him, we are able. He said to them, you will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. The context of the question being asked by these two to drink the cup of Jesus, to sit at his right hand and his left hand, and Jesus says, essentially he says no. What compels the no in this case?
They're asking the wrong question.
Yeah, yeah.
I think this one and previous one, underline it is just, Jesus doesn't fall into the trap of having to answer, feel like he needs to answer the questions that's been placed before him.
Hmm.
He just says it's not mine to answer, or he says, if there's an either or, he's like, there's more than either or, there's something
Mhm.
else going on here. And I think, at least I am, it's taking a long time to, and I still don't always get it, realize that I don't have to answer either or.
Hmm.
If someone presents me with that, I can step back and say, no.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you. Another example, Luke chapter 9, when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him and went and entered the village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. Why does Jesus say no to James and John?
Because it would be wrong
Mhm.
to say yes.
Yeah, it's wrong, and because what they're asking is something that is unmerciful, unloving. It's going to harm people if they had the ability to pull it off. Yeah. So Jesus says no to something that is simply not loving, not merciful. Luke 19, some of the Pharisees and the crowd said to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. And he answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. Tell your disciples to be quiet, Jesus says. No. Why?
If you're even saying I know wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah. This is the kind of circumstance where my no is not going to make a difference. One or two more. Luke 4, all spoke well of him and marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. And they said, isn't this Joseph's son? And he said to them, doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you did at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well. So the implied question being, Jesus, do here what you did in Capernaum. Do some miraculous signs for us. And in essence, Jesus says no. Okay, so we've talked about these as we've moved along, but just in summary, as you think about these instances from the ministry of Jesus, what were some legitimate reasons for Jesus saying no?
I think just to elaborate on what Debbie said, they're kind of asking the wrong questions. And so he doesn't feel a need to answer. Part of it is just not answering their questions or finding, why the questions may not be appropriate. I mean,
Yeah. So sometimes the question that's being asked is the wrong question. It's inappropriate. There's something about it that Jesus really can't act on.
And sometimes it was just the wrong thing. It was not the right thing to do.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, objectively, there was something wrong with it.
Right.
And then going back to that account in Mark chapter 1, with the line of sick people, the implicit request being, hey, come back and keep healing these people. That's a pretty good request. But Jesus recognizes there's more to him than that. There's more to his mission than that. And so that prompts a no.
Yeah, that was a choice that many of us are, torn between at times, choice between good things,
Mhm.
and we've got to look at, what's more important, what's a greater priority.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What is better or best rather than just what's good.
I mean, it's kind of interesting in that story because he's done that, it's just, that's not all he's going to do.
Right.
He
Yeah.
spent all night doing that. Everybody in the town showed up. I mean, it was just, that's not the only thing, and he seems to really need to focus. I mean, he wakes up early and says, what am I going to do? I can't do this only. It just, that's part of his decision process is taking time.
Yeah. So Jesus demonstrates an awareness of himself and awareness of his purpose in life. And that gives him the ability to say no in that situation. All right, let's watch another short video here.
And unfortunately, so the bad news is, for a while, no is the only way that gets you back to a life of yes. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to systematically walk through every part of my life and walk back some of those yeses to rebuild a deeper yes, a truer, more honest yes. Essentially, when we talked about it before, what I had to do was I look at all the chairs I had set up. My job at this point in the journey was to take down some of those chairs, to right size my life and my schedule, my capacity, my rhythms, to intentionally make my life a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to carry. So no became the word that I had to use to reshape kind of the edges and the dimensions of my life. And as you can imagine, as a person who wants to live so much yes, this was difficult for me. And so it ended up, it was like I had to use training wheels first, and then I could get to the end of the driveway, and then I could get to the end of the street. It was like learning to walk for the first time. And so when I first would say no to people, sometimes I would say it with like so many disclaimers and qualifications that they really would be totally confused about what I was talking about. Or I would like overthink all of it. I'd be like, oh, I'm going to have to say no, but I love you. I love you very much. And my love for you has nothing to do with this. And I will be there for you. And the people are like, it's actually fine. But I had so much trouble learning to say those words, learning to look people in the eye and say, I'm not going to give you what you want right now. I'm not going to be your reliable person right now. I'm not going to show up and magically pick up the pieces anymore. And those were difficult choices. I found that one of the hardest situations for me was when I would have to disappoint someone, especially someone that I respected, or when someone would use sort of, let's say, ever so slightly shaming words, and I would have to continue with my choice anyway. So I remember one situation, I was really trying to learn this, but it was pretty difficult. Henry was in preschool. It was before Mac was born. And he went to this little preschool, and I was working on a book, and I did not have quite enough time to get the book done. So I really needed to use every second of the preschool time. So I would like come flying into the parking lot. I'd run him into his little class. I'd go tearing out to the coffee shop, type, then tearing back in, pick him up, and go home. And I really was barely going to make my deadline if I used all of that time. But this preschool, they had a high level of parent involvement, which sort of is like, if I'm sending him to preschool, but I have to be there too, I feel like it sort of defeats the purpose. But it was like all the parents just dropped off their kids and just stayed, just colored and cut things out and played games. And I couldn't, because I had made this commitment to do this work that I really felt strongly about. I loved it. I felt called to it. But I remember there was one day there was a mom, and she was like, hey, can I have, $4 for this group gift for such and such? I'm sure. And she's like, I've been wanting to ask you for this for a long time, but you're just not around, because I was looking for you, and you're just like, because you're not around. And so I was going to maybe ask your husband, but he's like, not around. And I was like, no, I get it. I get it that you feel we are not around the preschool family environment enough. And it was like a knife in the heart for every working mom. One mom saying to another, you're not with your kids enough. That's like the lowest of low blows. And I remember going out to the car and being like, I'm going to do my work anyway. And I'm going to allow these parents to think I'm a flaky parent, but I'm going to do the work I feel called to do in this little segment of time. And I'm going to be the best parent I can outside of preschool time. I got an opportunity to work on a book to tell the story of a family and a restaurant, and it's just like totally up my alley. This is like my dream scenario. I love this family. I love this restaurant. I love what it would mean to be a part of it. Secretly, I've always wanted to work in a restaurant, and I never have. And they said that they would sometimes let me work there, like just practice, and I wouldn't really have any responsibilities because they wouldn't trust me because I have no experience. But I could pretend to work there. I mean, I was just like over the moon. Except I live in Chicago and this restaurant is in Seattle. And in order for me to do a good job on this project, in order to really do it, to really understand it, to be great at it, I'd have to spend so much of my time in a city that's not my city. And that was a hard one. And sometimes that's how it is. And I wish I could tell you that I had like a deep bubbling up of joy in my heart that I had done the right thing, but I really didn't. I just hated it. I just thought it was terrible. I wanted somehow cosmically to find more space and time and wrinkle the map so that Seattle and Chicago were right next door to each other. And I was not able to do any of that. But with each time that I said it, it got easier. And I was delighted to find that the healthy people in my life were totally cheering me on. Instead of being horrified, like, what did you just say to me? They were like, thank you. And it's one of those things that's sort of contagious. It's like anything, like when you're around people who work out, you want to work out. I mean, I don't because I never want to work out, but I think about it more when I'm around people who are healthy, right? When you're around people who practice a healthy rhythm of yes and no, you're setting the people around you free to do the same. So the more I was being intentional and careful about my life, the more my friends were cheering me on to do it. And the more they did it, the more I did it. So there was a work thing that came up, and it was like a friend needed me to kind of bail him out, and it was going to require me leaving one event to fly to another city, to wake up early, but I was ready. I was like, coach, put me in, like a good soldier, right? And right at the very last minute, I realized this is the exact thing that got me here. It's me deciding to be the good soldier at the expense of my family, at the expense of my sleep, at the expense of my own health, to prove to someone else that I love them and I'm going to be there for them. And so what I said was, I love you and I'm going to be there for you in my heart. I cannot get on that plane for this one. And I was so scared about what he would say. I so badly wanted him to think highly of me. And his response was, you're getting better at this. And I was so thankful.
Can you think of some times when you've said no in a healthy way? What was the result of that?
Shock and dismay.
On the part of the people around you?
Mhm.
It's very mysterious.
I can think of just recently, Carolina texted me earlier in the week and asked if I could take care of Mia while they had this hearing. And I had already, we were at camp, we were coming back, but this is kind of a family vacation time, and I didn't really see, I think she probably has other resources if I just, she's not alone, she's other people she can call on, and it's, I mean, Ricardo ended up taking care of me instead. I gave her some suggestions, it wasn't that, I just others.
Yeah.
Julia wouldn't have worked out,
Yeah.
but, yeah, so. That's very.
That's a good example, yeah. Let me share this from Damon Zaharides. You're already saying no.
Chris Deal was about to say something.
Oh, go ahead, Dale. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's an art to saying no. There's an offensive way to say no, and there's a perfectly warm, understandable way to say no. And I think that has to be paid attention to too. I mean, sometimes when some people say no to me, it's, I don't owe you an explanation. Well, I didn't actually say you did, but what's with the attitude and the edge here? Just the courtesy of saying, a little regret, but I really am tied up there. That's all I need.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, it's like, really? So I think, I think there are healthy times to say no, and I think there are healthy ways to say no.
Yeah,
and I think you should do it often, but I think you should do it about healthy things and in healthy ways.
Yeah. We want to always communicate love, respect, honor for the person in front of us, in a sense that we've heard their request, we care about them and their request, even if we're not able to fulfill it.
And I heard her say, and I think it's pretty natural that you might be inclined to feel the need to over-explain. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm kind of tied up. I'm sorry, but I'm tied up. That's good enough for me. I don't need to know how you're tied up. I just need to know that thought's gone into it and you care, but you can't do this. Oh, okay.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah.
There's a way to accept someone's no as well.
Yeah.
If you gracious, and I got a lot of no's last year, which is fine. They're all dead now. But if you give someone the freedom to say no, it opens you up to a future yes. If you accept it, if you accept it graciously.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Debbie.
With for about 10 years, I was the director of volunteers at a nonprofit. And when I started working with volunteers, I was really clear with them that, you're volunteering because you want to do this. So when I ask you specifically to do this task at a particular time, I know you might have to say no to that particular time. And know that it's okay to say no to that particular time. And I will come back. Don't worry that I won't come back. I'll come back to you again. And I've used that at church as well. I ask people to help. If you can't, okay, but I'll come back and ask you another time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. letting people signaling ahead of time that a no is just fine.
Mhm,
And I will probably ask again.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
I
good.
will not give up.
And she does do that.
Mhm.
Relentlessly.
Until you say yes.
Eventually.
This list here from the book Art of Saying No, I think might stir some thinking, some reasons why we say yes when we may need to say no. We say yes because we want to avoid offending people or disappointing people or seeming selfish, or because we want to help others, perhaps too much, or we struggle with low self-esteem, or we want others to like us, or we want to appear valuable, or we fear missing out on an opportunity, or we succumb to emotional bullying, or we are averse to conflict. So lots of different things that may motivate us to say yes, even when we really ought to say no. I think this last clip is a little lengthy. So what I'm going to do here is get past it. Get to these last two slides. One of the images that she uses in this last video clip is the image of a scalpel, that a no can be a scalpel that cuts away things that are really not necessary in our lives, allowing us to say yes to what remains, what is truly critical to our lives. And the sense that no is a way to get to yes, right? So as we're able to say no in healthy ways at healthy times, it allows us to say yes to the things that really matter to us. And then this image here, that we might think about our lives as a series of concentric circles. What's at the center is most valuable, most critical, most the things that we're most passionate about and have a strong sense of responsibility to. And so the question is, can we identify that clearly in our lives? Perhaps, as I think maybe Jesus is doing this in Mark chapter 1. He knows exactly what's at the core of who he is, what his purpose in life is. And he's going to say yes to that every time. And that allows him then, as the concentric circles flow outward to things that aren't quite as core, it allows him to say no when the occasion demands it. And so I think one thing that we might do as we sort of leave this video tonight is to work on identifying what's at the core of our life, what's at the center of our life, what responsibilities, people, relationships, etc., are the things that we truly believe God is calling us to say yes